I'm writing this from my parents' house, where I've been staying for the past 2 months, still trying to piece together what happened the night my fiancé vanished without a trace. My name is Claire, I'm 27 years old, and I was supposed to get married on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day that revealed everything I thought I knew about the man I loved was a carefully constructed lie. Ryan and I met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was charming and attentive, the kind of guy who remembered small details about our conversations and always texted back promptly. He worked in finance, or at least that's what he told me, and seemed to have his life together in ways that impressed me. Within 6 months, we were talking about our future, and a year after that, he proposed during a weekend trip to Maine. The wedding planning process was smooth and exciting. We'd found the perfect venue, a beautiful historic inn with gardens and a reception hall that could accommodate our 150 guests. My dress was everything I'd dreamed of, my bridesmaids were excited, and our families seemed to genuinely like each other. Ryan was involved and engaged in the planning, which my married friends told me was rare. He had opinions about the menu and the music, and even helped me pick out centerpieces. The only slightly odd thing was that Ryan didn't have many people on his guest list. He said most of his family lived overseas and couldn't make the trip, and he'd lost touch with many of his college friends after moving around for work. His groomsmen were mostly guys he knew from his current job and his gym. I thought it was a bit unusual, but everyone's family situation is different, and I didn't want to make him feel bad about it. The week before the wedding was hectic but manageable. Out-of-town guests started arriving, we had the final dress fitting, confirmed details with vendors, and everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as we'd planned. Ryan seemed slightly stressed, but I attributed that to normal pre-wedding jitters. He kept checking his phone more than usual and seemed distracted during conversations, but I figured he was probably dealing with last-minute work issues. The rehearsal dinner was on Thursday night, 2 days before our Saturday wedding. It went perfectly. Both families mingled well, the restaurant we'd chosen had excellent food, and everyone gave sweet toasts about our relationship. Ryan seemed more relaxed that evening than he'd been all week, laughing and joking with my dad and his groomsmen. We left the dinner around 10:30 and headed back to our apartment to get some rest. That's when things started to feel off. Ryan said he needed to go back to his office to grab some files he'd forgotten, work stuff he needed to review before taking time off for our honeymoon. I thought it was strange to go to the office that late, but Ryan said his boss had been demanding lately, and he didn't want any issues hanging over him during our wedding week. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd be back in an hour. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. I tried calling Ryan around midnight, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I texted him asking if everything was okay and got no response. By 2 in the morning, I was genuinely worried. I called his office and it rang unanswered. I even tried calling one of his groomsmen to see if Ryan had mentioned anything about working late, but the groomsmen seemed confused and said Ryan hadn't mentioned any late-night work plans. I stayed up all night waiting for Ryan to come home, or at least call to explain what was happening. Friday morning arrived, the day before our wedding, and I still hadn't heard from him. His phone continued going straight to voicemail, like it was turned off or dead. I was panicking at this point, running through every possible scenario in my head. Had he been in an accident? Was he lying in a hospital somewhere, unable to contact me? Had something terrible happened? I called Ryan's parents, who were staying at a hotel nearby. His mother said she hadn't heard from him since the rehearsal dinner, but I could hear the worry in her voice. His father said he'd start making some calls to see if anyone knew where Ryan was. I contacted my maid of honor, Jessica, and told her Ryan was missing. She immediately came over to the apartment to help me figure out what to do. Jessica convinced me we needed to file a missing person report with the police. I was hesitant because it had only been about 10 hours since I'd last seen Ryan, but Jessica pointed out that it was completely out of character for him to disappear without contact, especially the day before our wedding. We went to the police station and I gave them all the information I had about Ryan, his physical description, what he'd been wearing, where he said he was going, everything.
The officer taking the report seemed sympathetic, but also slightly skeptical in a way I couldn't quite read. He asked standard questions about our relationship, whether we'd been fighting, whether Ryan had seemed upset or depressed. I insisted everything had been fine, that we'd just had a lovely rehearsal dinner and Ryan had been happy and relaxed. The officer said they'd look into it and asked me to provide a recent photo of Ryan, which I did. I went back to our apartment and started calling everyone I could think of who might know where Ryan was. His coworkers from the finance firm said they hadn't seen him, his gym buddies said they hadn't been there, even his landlord from before we moved in together said he hadn't heard from Ryan in over a year. Every call led to a dead end, and my panic escalated into full-blown terror about what might have happened to him. By Friday afternoon, with still no word from Ryan, I made the heartbreaking decision to postpone the wedding. I couldn't possibly go through with the ceremony when the groom had vanished and might be injured or worse. I called our venue and vendors, explaining the situation and asking if we could reschedule. Most were understanding and sympathetic, though we'd lose our deposits. I had Jessica help me contact all our guests to tell them the wedding was postponed indefinitely due to an emergency. Friday evening, the police called me and asked if I could come back to the station. They had some information they needed to discuss with me in person. I drove there with my mom, my heart pounding with fear about what they'd discovered. Had they found Ryan's body? Had there been an accident? When we arrived, the same officer from earlier sat me down in a private room with a very serious expression. What he told me next shattered my entire understanding of reality. The police had gone to Ryan's workplace, the finance firm he'd told me he worked for. The company had no record of anyone named Ryan Mitchell ever working there. They'd never heard of him. The officer showed me the business card Ryan had given me when we first met, and the phone number on it didn't match the company's actual number. I insisted there must be some mistake, that Ryan definitely worked there because I'd called him at that office number dozens of times over the years. The officer explained that the number on the business card went to a voicemail system Ryan must have set up himself, not to an actual company. Everything about Ryan's job had been fabricated. The officer continued with even more disturbing information. They'd gone to Ryan's apartment he listed as his previous address before we moved in together. The landlord said no one named Ryan Mitchell had ever lived there. They'd run Ryan's driver's license and social security number and found significant irregularities that suggested the identity might be fraudulent or stolen.
I couldn't process what I was hearing. How could the man I'd been dating for 3 years, the man I was supposed to marry, be living under a fake identity with a fake job? The officer said they were treating this as a potential case of identity theft or fraud and were investigating further. They asked me detailed questions about Ryan's habits, his friends, where he went during the day when he claimed to be at work, any unusual behavior I might have noticed. Looking back through the lens of this new information, things I'd dismissed or rationalized suddenly seemed like glaring red flags. Ryan always paid for everything in cash and never wanted to use credit cards, saying he preferred to avoid debt. He'd been vague about his family, claiming they lived in Europe and he'd grown up overseas, which explained why he didn't have many childhood friends here. He'd discouraged me from connecting with him on social media, saying he kept his accounts private for work reasons. The police got a warrant to search Ryan's car, which had been parked at our apartment complex. Inside, they found multiple fake IDs with different names but Ryan's photo, several credit cards in various names, and a burner phone with text messages that suggested Ryan was involved in some kind of financial scheme. There were references to investors and returns, and amounts of money that seemed way too large to be legitimate. Over the weekend, while I should have been celebrating my wedding, police continued investigating Ryan's real identity. They eventually determined his actual name was Derek Sullivan, and he had a criminal record in 2 other states for fraud and identity theft. He'd been running investment scams, convincing people to give him money for fake opportunities and then disappearing with their funds. Our entire relationship had apparently been part of his cover, making him seem like a normal guy with a normal life, while he was actually stealing from people. The police found evidence that Ryan, or Derek, or whatever his real name was, had been planning his disappearance for weeks before the wedding. He'd slowly been draining a bank account I didn't even know he had, probably filled with money from his latest victims. He'd stopped paying rent on our apartment 2 months earlier, though I hadn't known because I wasn't on the lease and assumed he was handling it. He'd essentially been preparing his exit while simultaneously planning our wedding with me. What hurt almost worse than the deception was learning that I'd probably been a target too. Police found documents showing that Ryan had been trying to get himself added to my bank accounts and had been asking questions about my family's finances. He'd suggested several times that we should open a joint investment account, something I'd resisted because I wanted to keep some financial independence. The detective told me I was actually lucky Ryan had disappeared when he did, because his typical pattern was to clean out his partners financially and then vanish. Our entire relationship had apparently been part of his cover, making him seem like a normal guy with a normal life, while he was actually stealing from people. The police found evidence that Ryan, or Derek, or whatever his real name was, had been planning his disappearance for weeks before the wedding. He'd slowly been draining a bank account I didn't even know he had, probably filled with money from his latest victims. He'd stopped paying rent on our apartment 2 months earlier, though I hadn't known because I wasn't on the lease and assumed he was handling it. He'd essentially been preparing his exit while simultaneously planning our wedding with me. What hurt almost worse than the deception was learning that I'd probably been a target too. Police found documents showing that Ryan had been trying to get himself added to my bank accounts and had been asking questions about my family's finances. He'd suggested several times that we should open a joint investment account, something I'd resisted because I wanted to keep some financial independence. The detective told me I was actually lucky Ryan had disappeared when he did, because his typical pattern was to clean out his partners financially and then vanish. The wedding venue wouldn't refund our deposit, even though the groom had turned out to be a criminal using a fake identity. Most vendors were sympathetic, but couldn't return money for services they'd already prepared. I was out nearly $20,000 in wedding expenses, plus the emotional cost of having my entire relationship revealed as a lie. My mom helped me move out of the apartment Ryan and I had shared, packing up my things while trying to avoid touching any of his belongings, which were now evidence. I spent the next several weeks in a fog of shock and grief. I'd lost not just a relationship, but my entire understanding of the past 3 years of my life. Every memory was now tainted with the knowledge that Ryan wasn't who he'd claimed to be. That trip to Maine where he proposed, probably funded with stolen money. The sweet gestures and thoughtful gifts, manipulation to keep me invested in the relationship. The plans we'd made for our future, lies he never intended to follow through on. The police never found Ryan, or Derek, or whatever his real name was. Apparently, he was experienced at disappearing and had probably left the state or even the country. The detective said people like him often move to a new location, create a new identity, and start the whole process over again with a new victim. I filed a victim impact statement and provided all the information I had, but the chances of ever seeing him or getting any kind of justice were essentially zero. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been the victim of a sophisticated con artist, someone who was skilled at creating false identities and manipulating people. She said I shouldn't blame myself for not seeing through Ryan's lies, because that was literally his expertise, fooling people. But knowing that intellectually didn't make me feel any less stupid for being so thoroughly deceived. It's been 2 months since Ryan disappeared, and I'm slowly rebuilding my life. I had to find a new apartment since the lease on our old place was in his fake name and the landlord wanted nothing to do with the situation. I've been working with a financial advisor to make sure all my accounts are secure and Ryan didn't access anything before he left. I joined a support group for victims of fraud, which has been surprisingly helpful to talk with other people who've been scammed in similar ways. The hardest part is trusting my own judgment again. If I could be so completely fooled by someone I lived with for 2 years and dated for another year before that, how can I trust myself to see the truth about anyone?
My therapist says rebuilding that trust in myself will take time, and that it's normal to question everything after experiencing such a massive betrayal. My friends and family have been incredibly supportive. Jessica organized an unwedding party where we wore the bridesmaids' dresses and ate cake and celebrated me dodging a bullet, even though it didn't feel like dodging anything at the time. My parents have been patient with me living at their house while I figure out my next steps. Even strangers who've heard my story have reached out with kindness and their own stories of being conned. I still have days where I see someone who looks like Ryan from behind and my heart starts pounding. I still sometimes reach for my phone to text him before remembering he's gone and never was real anyway. I still have wedding gifts sitting in boxes that I need to return to people who had shipped them before I could cancel the wedding. The physical reminders of what I've lost are everywhere. But I'm also discovering strength I didn't know I had. I reported my story to a consumer protection website to warn other potential victims. I've been working with the detective to identify patterns that might help catch Ryan in the future. I'm learning about the warning signs of fraud and manipulation so I can protect myself and maybe help others avoid what happened to me. What would you do if your partner disappeared the night before your wedding and you discovered their entire identity was fake? How do you rebuild trust in yourself and others after being so completely deceived? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real stories about surviving betrayal and finding strength after devastation.